There is a point where weather and the 2020 election collide.
They would be the last people I would vote for.
Definitely is going to drive my vote.
We are hitting the road listening to you, going to several states that really could go either way this election, where one key environmental issue could change the course of history for all of us.
When you're part of a party, you are assigned a batch of values that you're supposed to subscribe to.
This is the beginning of a nationwide tour that will take us to Arizona.
This is large-scale, universal, grid-scale solar.
The power companies make it very expensive for people to go solar.
Ohio. I have a lot of friends that they planted their whole 2019 crop in like 3 days.
Florida.
So I can't get to school. I'll have to walk in like knee-high floods.
Maine.
If climate change continues to warm the waters of the Gulf of Maine, it will change the fishery.
And Texas.
We are on the most beautiful town square in the state of Texas. This is Georgetown, Texas.
Today's Texas is a slightly less red state, driven by immigration and changing values in the big city suburbs.
But if these trends continue, you could imagine Texas becoming a more of like a 50-50 state, 4, 8, 12 years from now, potentially.
We met with some voters at a popular Tex-Mex spot in Georgetown, north of Austin, where we found out...
You're conservative or you don't say it.
Yeah, or you don't say it.
In Texas, you're conservative.
Well, in this part
or
of Texas.
you don't say.
Yeah. Or you don't say it.
Has there been any change here in Texas as to the amount of people who are accepting the science behind global climate change?
I think so. We do have a group here that is concerned about it. And that is important for me because what we do right now is going to affect our children and our grandchildren and so on and so forth.
Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, these issues of power and technology and jobs, they cut across divided communities in ways you may not expect.
In the vast dry tableland are huge cattle ranges. But above all the diversity and value of other farm crops, the huge oil fields of the Southwest are part of a vast basin.
Back then and today, Texas is an oil state. But it's not just oil anymore. The wind turbines in Texas aren't completely replacing fossil fuels. They're working alongside traditional electric plants to build a new way to power Texas.
Some people, let me put that, are more interested in the argument than in the solution.
In Texas, where 16% of the power now comes from wind, there's a new conversation that could influence who wins the White House and Congress in 2020. In 2012, Mitt Romney won Texas by about 14 percentage points. Obama was reelected that year. But by 2016, Donald Trump's Texas win was down to about 4 percentage points.
How do we make that transition to greener energy?
There are now 15,000 towers like this in the nation's #1 wind power producing state, and the industry claims all this green energy prevented 54 million metric tons of planet-warming carbon from entering the atmosphere in 2018 alone. That's the equivalent of taking 11.5 million cars off the road. Tell me about the weather today.
A little foggy, as you can see.
On a dreary day in Goldthwaite, pretty much in the center of Texas, we met with Gary Bunch, who knows this isn't about numbers. This is about people with real jobs thanks to the greener economy in this deep red state.
For me, I actually come from a family that was in petroleum.
Yeah.
And to me, I don't see a problem with having both.
On this one side alone, there are 86 towers with their blades spinning in the wind, each producing 1.7 megawatts of power.
Not a lot of people actually get to see these, like I said, up close and personal.
Gary climbs up there almost every day. What kind of view do you get when you go out the top?
It's probably the best part of this job.
It's a hard climb that takes a good 15 minutes to do. Let's take a look up top. Wind's starting to pick up. You can really feel the tower moving underneath you. Can you guys hear me down there? Quite a view. These massive arms in the sky are helping to reshape Texas, creating 25 to 26,000 jobs statewide. Both candidates would like a win in Texas.
Mobilize! Mobilize the world!
against climate change.
But how does President Trump feel about wind energy?
You'd have windmills all over the place if you had crooked Hillary. They'd be knocking out those birds left and right. Those windmills, wah, wah, wah.
So some people call them windmills, some people call them wind turbines. What's the proper term?
Turbines.
Turbine.
If it was a mill, we'd be grinding flour, wheat, something like that, but we're producing power, so it's a turbine.
And you can trace that power all the way back to Georgetown. You are a Republican through and through.
I am indeed.
Most people here are voting for Donald Trump no matter what.
That's true.
He says that we want to bring back coal.
Clean, beautiful coal.
No, I got bad news for people in the coal industry. Coal is not going to come back. It's so expensive to produce compared to renewables and compared to natural gas.
Dale Ross, the Republican mayor of Georgetown, Texas, has done something controversial here. Every business in his city, every home, every light now runs on 100% renewable power when you average it out over a year. A first for Texas.
You know, when you're talking about wind farms in Texas, there are hundreds and hundreds of miles here from here. For example, the wind farm that Georgetown gets its wind from is up in the Panhandle near Amarillo.
Texas turbines produce no greenhouse gases, but transmitting that power across this big state is still a challenge. This plan was not an immediate hit.
It's not really a question of do we spend money, it's a question on where we put it.
Did you lose up to $8 million on this deal?
That's probably about right.
Customers, according to the city, are now paying about $20 more per month to make up for the loss. But Georgetown is the 7th fastest growing city in the nation. They'll soon need all the power they can get, and the prices will even out. Technology and changing attitudes are driving this move towards renewables in Texas. But does that translate to 2020 votes? Will people with an eye on this issue actually show up in November?
Are they going to turn out in big numbers this year? We'll see. And if I think they do, then I think you'll see politicians in the future will start listening to them on environmental issues.
I'm going to start by rejoining something that helped put together the Paris Climate Accord.
Like it or not,
It's great to be back in this state.
this is a political issue. Mr. Trump has called the concept of global climate change an expensive hoax, bullshit, a concept created by the Chinese. He later claimed that last one was a joke. But even as president, Mr. Trump seems to confuse weather with climate. When it was cold in November 2018, the president tweeted, "Whatever happened to global warming?" But recently, he's changed his tone.
What is your position on global warming? Do you think it's a hoax?
No, not at all. Nothing's a hoax. Nothing's a hoax about that. It's a very serious subject. I want clean air. I want clean water. I want the cleanest air. I want the cleanest water.
You know, a lot of Republicans are funded by the fossil fuel industry with campaign contributions.
And you're a Republican mayor of a city in Texas saying that.
Yeah, but
do you get pushback from people?
Obviously I get pushback from my Republican friends, but I will say this, you know, I like to base decisions on facts.
Realize this is a good
Back
idea.
at the wind farm, they've heard all the criticisms, like the wind doesn't blow all the time. But this blanket of turbines covering Texas ensures the wind's usually blowing somewhere. Whenever your wind is blowing, you're sending power to the grid.
Correct.
But if it's not blowing, then you're not sending anything to any kind of storage system.
Correct. And then and that's a technology they're working on.
The next big thing is going to be battery technology.
To see what's coming soon, we'll need to head to Arizona. So these are the huge batteries.
These are the batteries. These are the batteries.
But first, we're going to Swing State, Florida, where there's a growing problem. Streets that flood even on days when there's not a cloud in the sky. We were there just as giant new seawalls were going up. Florida almost always picks the president. Look at the last 14 big elections. Florida picked Nixon in '72 and kept on picking winners all the way to Trump. The only one Florida missed was 1992 when Bill Clinton won the White House without Florida. So we walked into this coffee house where we found today's voters are a new American brew. For some of them, issues like climate change rise to the top.
Definitely is going to drive my vote, because usually most people that care about those situations also tend to care about just like They actually believe in global warming. There's a ton of flooding going on, so I can't get to school. I'll have to walk in like knee-high floods.
As you'll see in a moment, this is not a hoax, it's not an opinion, it's a real problem for Florida. Doreen lives in Broward County, a blue section of the state on this 2016 election map. For Doreen and other likely Democratic voters, climate change is a major issue.
For 21 million people, I think 14 of which live along the coast, this is a big deal.
But if you look at the rest of the state, away from the coast, the cities, the college towns, you'll find where more than 4.6 million Republican voters helped Donald Trump win the presidency in 2016. In February, the nonpartisan Pew Research Center asked Republican voters to place what they care about on this chart. Climate change ended up here, pretty low. So what issues do they care about? Well, jobs, drugs, trade, those are all big deals for both red and blue voters. But climate, no, not Republican voters. In fact, it's where you'll find the biggest gap between red and blue dots here. Broadly speaking, climate change is only an issue for likely Democratic voters, both nationally and here in Florida. But this is also the state where you can see concrete evidence all around you of sea level rise. And when we say concrete, we mean actual concrete and other construction materials. Take a look at what's going on all around us. The city of Fort Lauderdale is building these walls to hold the water back, and they're taller than they've ever been before. Even before coronavirus and the protests, seawall construction around Florida was already behind schedule. Simply put, the ocean is rising much faster than construction project speed.
Even Republicans will admit we lost 10 years by denying climate change, and now we have to speed up.
This looks like it's as high as a two-story building.
At some point, most of this will be underwater.
The city's sustainability director, Dr. Nancy Gassman, tells me large vibrating machines will soon embed these giant walls of metal called sheet pile 30 feet below the seafloor. This oceanfront neighborhood is one of many built on the front line of the climate crisis. So this is the seawall right here. This is the old one.
This is the old seawall.
And then this is the new one right here.
Correct.
This is popular Miami Beach, the playground of the Americas.
In the 1950s, the ocean in South Florida was 8 inches lower than it is today. When this vacation paradise was built, nobody planned for this much sea level rise, a problem that's only accelerated in the past decade.
You too can enjoy the same fun of Greater Miami.
Sure, they had seawalls, but the tallest one used to be around 4 feet.
And it turns out that the old maximum is now the new minimum. So the highest seawall previously that you could build is now the lowest seawall that you can build.
The city of Miami Beach has already spent more than $500 million raising buildings and installing these pumps
that takes that water and lifts it up to a higher elevation.
And they do help, but it's still flooding on sunny days here.
This is going to become part of a regular scene.
All this construction everywhere, yeah. In Hollywood, Florida, we met with Assistant City Manager Gus Zambrano, who's also building larger seawalls, planning to elevate the Oceanside Firehouse and spending $1 million on just this one tiny parking lot.
And it's going to impact people in a real way.
This report from the McKinsey Global Institute says rising seas could wash away 35% of Florida's real estate value by 2050.
It's already extremely expensive to live out here.
Homeowner Denny Lamore told us he's seen people trading oceanfront life for a home further inland.
Like looking to sell my home and so on and so forth. So I've just been seeing the prices rise more in my area, which is more towards out west.
The predictions 20, 30 years ago of where we would be today have actually been pretty good on the models. What they did not predict is the melting in the Antarctic and in Greenland.
Last year, we saw the record melt in Greenland for ourselves. And what we saw was not political. It was just physics. In the past 15 years, Greenland has lost 4 trillion tons of ice, raising global sea levels by about 1/2 inch. In most places, that's enough to erase about 4 feet of beach.
Sea level rise doesn't care about politics or the party that you belong to. We see this impact in our community, and as a local municipality, we need to respond.
Fixing this one street, Cordova Road in Fort Lauderdale, is a $6 million project, $200 million citywide.
I can't tell you how many times where I've had to quote unquote use like boats to get to like Publix or something like that, and it's kind of awful because you don't know what's in there, and so especially just like there could be snakes, gators, all that stuff. So it's a little scary.
It's like we have to look at more options because obviously the options we're looking at now isn't doing anything positive for us, right?
More or less, we need to figure out how to actually save our Earth.
Like in sunny Arizona, where you'd think capturing solar power would be easy. It's not. It's a fight.
It would be nice if America adopted renewable energy policies.
We are in Arizona, just outside Phoenix, where the sun shines about 299 days a year.
In recent years, Republicans very often carry the state in presidential elections.
One of the political issues here is how to turn the Arizona sun into a real alternative energy source.
For some people, it's an election issue, yes, but there are so many issues right now, it's tough.
The rest of the world isn't waiting. They know it's essential to human existence. Focusing on the future is the only way we're going to be able to build a new green infrastructure. We can do a lot.
Solar, I love solar, but it's not powerful enough to power these massive factories and plants that we have being built all over.
So the two candidates do not agree on the importance of solar power. But as you're about to see, in a state where Donald Trump's margin of victory was razor thin, 91,000 votes, roughly the population of Yuma, Arizona voters do want this kind of energy.
But when our leader says climate change is a hoax and windmills are ugly and shouldn't be used,
There's 30, I think 30 on this side.
This is Randy Miller. His roof creates clean, carbon-free, made in the USA power. He has not paid a power bill in 3 whole years.
I wasn't doing this for the environment or climate change or anything. I was like, my bill's like $400 a month for electricity. How can I make it lower?
But here in Arizona, there is a burning power struggle between registered voters like Randy and Sheila and big electric companies. So these are similar to the solar panels that people would put on their roofs at home.
Yes, similar solar technology.
Similar technology, different rules.
the power companies make it very expensive for people to go solar.
Sheila Matamatsu does not have any solar panels on her house, and she would like the same system Randy has. But she and other customers have been running into political brick walls.
They want to keep the money, so that's what it's about.
It comes right off the panel.
Over at Randy's house, 62 panels run everything. They even keep his Tesla at a full battery. But he started this project a decade ago, before the power companies changed the rules for everyone else.
They make people go from traditional rate plans to solar rate plans.
Sheila's power company, SRP, acknowledges the solar plan does cost more, because when solar customers tap into the grid, it costs the company money, and they don't want to pass that along to people who don't have solar panels. Power companies are in the business of selling power.
When you have solar panels on your roof, that's private solar. You benefit from it, your family benefits from it. When you have something like this is universal solar. It feeds the entire grid.
Here at the solar farm and here in Sheila's backyard, these oranges are growing in the sun, wild and free. They're also a kind of solar power plant themselves, soaking in rays and turning that energy into sugar. But Sheila would like her power company to act more like her warehouse store,
I go ahead and I buy oranges at Costco.
where they never charge her any more just because she's producing oranges at home as well. The power company, however, has solar producers on the more expensive solar plan.
For instance, if Costco decided to charge me more for my oranges or make me go on the orange plan, I would be able to go to Sam's Club, right? Here I don't have a choice. I'm stuck with SRP.
To be fair, many power companies and large-scale solar providers are making solar a reality. So these things move.
They do.
About an hour south of Phoenix, there's a field of these sun-tracking thin film panels.
I'm Margie Sweezer-Fisher. I'm an engineer at NextEra Energy.
NextEra is the company that built this site next to a separate power company's electric lines. It is here where Margie's company feeds directly into the grid.
We're generating power from a sustainable source.
Solar technology has come so far that it's now actually cheaper to produce power from the sun than power from, say, a lump of coal. But here at this facility, they are also using the economy of scale. All these panels linked together and hooked to a battery power 5,000 homes. So these are the huge batteries.
These are the batteries. These are the batteries.
Companies like Tesla have made giant 10 megawatt batteries like this possible.
We charge up the battery earlier in the day, and customers actually use the highest level of energy later in the day. That's when we use the battery to beef it back up and provide the level of power that our customers need.
The source of fuel is free. It's the sun. It's plentiful.
Still plenty of sun in Arizona, but shrimp off the warming coast of Maine?
We haven't had a fishery in at least 5 years.
And in Ohio?
We're going to see more corn and soybeans being grown in Canada.
Since New Year's Day 2020, before coronavirus, we have been on a nationwide road trip. If you look at Florida, Texas, talking with voters just like you during this unusual presidential election year.
257 acres of solar panels.
Each swing state has one big environmental issue that affects everyone, no matter who they vote for or what they believe.
Fishermen are pretty reluctant to believe a lot of stuff.
There have been a lot of converts.
These are issues that could swing undecided voters as we race to save the planet.
Is it awesome?
Okay.
Clam chowder?
If it's so good, yeah. Awesome. Then.
Awesome clam chowder and outstanding lobster rolls. That's Maine, right? But it's also home to some dramatically shifting weather patterns lately.
It's scary to think about the changes in weather that have taken place everywhere, not just, in Maine.
You probably expect Joe Biden to do better in this state, although it's still pretty competitive.
That's because Maine is one of the only states that split their electoral college votes. There's 4 up for grabs.
It split 3-1 last time, and that would probably be the best bet as to how it would split this time.
So it's not a winner-take-all state.
It is not a winner-take-all state.
And since the political winds can blow in so many different ways, any one issue could potentially tip the balance.
Merge onto I-295 North.
Okay, there's a fresh snow on the ground. It's about 25 degrees, but that does not stop the fishing season here in the great state of Maine. On a crisp January morning, after 2 hours warming up a frozen marine engine, the Wild Irish Rose is headed out in search of lobster.
I'm Steve Train. I'm a lobsterman here in the state of Maine. I fish off of the town of Long Island.
For Steve and the other 5,833 captains who fish this coastline, lobstering has been relatively easy lately.
You drop a trap that's baited, check it again a few days later and see if there's lobsters in it.
They say these waters aren't what they used to be. In 1948, fishermen would pull up 15 million pounds of lobster each year. 40 years later, it was 22 million pounds. 10 years later, it more than doubled. By 2018, the same area gave up 121 million pounds of live Maine lobster. There are more traps out there than in 1948, but that does not account for a change this drastic.
6 times what we had in the 50s through the 80s.
We're going out past the bell at Portland Harbor to find out what's going on here. Why so many lobsters all of a sudden?
Whether it was maybe just a blip on the radar for a generation or whether it's climate change, I don't know.
It's not just lobster that's changed. 10 years ago, this winter fishery was crawling with shrimp.
The shrimp up here is affected by climate, or more affected than any other species up here.
But as the water started to warm, the shrimp disappeared. This is actually video of Gulf shrimp from Louisiana, not Pandanus borealis off the coast of Maine. We could not find any shrimp in Maine, and it's not for lack of searching. The shrimp fishery here is all but gone.
We haven't had a fishery in at least 5 years.
This climate stuff is political. In September 2018, President Trump told his supporters,
"And we're strongly protecting our public lands for hunters and fishermen and everyone who loves the outdoors."
At least 5 times after that 2018 rally, the president has questioned the very existence of global warming, which happens mostly in the oceans.
that we take drastic action right now to address the climate disaster facing the nation and our world.
His rival, former Vice President Joe Biden, on the other hand, has made warming oceans a major campaign ad issue.
And the world badly needs us to do it.
But here's the interesting part. When it comes to lobster, this ocean warming that started in the early 2000s has actually been good for business. These are baby lobsters. They hatch from an egg and take 7 years or more to get to surf and turf size. Scientists from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and the University of Maine say a sweet spot of perfect water for baby lobsters has been slowly creeping up the American coastline. So Andy, I understand you're the scientist who came up with this research.
Yeah, I did. I was actually on a plane, believe it or not, going to a meeting. So I pulled up the sea surface temperature data from around the world and started doing that comparison.
By the time that plane landed, Dr. Andy Pershing had the first piece of climate data to solve this lobster puzzle. And he'd eventually have a forecast for the future.
What surprised me was, how quickly we could go from kind of one sort of climate state and one ecosystem to now this, what appears to feel like a very different climate state.
The water here in the Gulf of Maine may seem good and icy when you put your hands in it, but the research shows that over the past 30 years, the water here has warmed at more than 3 times the global ocean average.
So as our water temperature warmed, the sweet spot for the egg and larval lobsters was greater.
This big sector of the local economy was booming, all because that warm water sweet spot that baby lobsters love has moved north right into their harbor. But there is a downside to this easy come, easy go seafood bonanza.
As this change to the climate continues, if it does, we're going to get beyond the sweet spot.
Look at the size of this guy here. Look how big those claws are. This is about 3.5 pounds. It is just about the largest lobster you can legally take from the ocean here. The problem is, as the water warms up, that sweet spot could move north. Way north.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be on the ground in just a few minutes.
500 miles north is New Brunswick, Canada. They consider themselves the lobster capital of the world. And this right here is in fact the largest lobster in the world. Once a year, the US fishermen and Canadian fishermen get together for an international lobster summit. It's going on right now down the street.
Ask anybody where lobster comes from, they tell you it's from Maine.
In this friendly international rivalry, there is some serious news here.
Climate change is an underlying theme under almost anything we talk about here.
Dr. Rick Welly of the University of Maine is one of the leading experts when it comes to climate's impact on the lobster industry.
A little bit of warming made a big difference.
What eventually happens to Maine lobster all depends on how much carbon is in the atmosphere by 2050.
I don't think so. Fishermen are pretty reluctant to believe a lot of stuff.
There's been a healthy skepticism about, whether climate change is real, but I think there have been a lot of converts over the past decade.
I think it's talked about more, and we watch it more than we did 10 years ago.
Here's what the computer models suggest. If we, all of us, all over the world, reduce our emissions in the coming decades, Maine's water temperature stabilizes. If we don't change our ways,
then Maine starts to feel like Rhode Island or New Jersey, and that's where we start to really lose our lobster fishery.
They're really not concerned about it. Yeah, not that they shouldn't be, but they're not. It's not going to affect them in their lifetime. They should be worried about the generations behind us. Sometimes they're not. I think it's a little short-sighted.
John Williams and the other fishermen here have a few measures that can keep this lobster boom going. Here's one. They don't take the females with eggs or the really big males. You said people would be surprised to know about all the lobsters you throw back.
We can't take the small ones. We can't take the big ones.
I worry about them being overinvested.
So you don't want to be a one-industry town during a boom.
That's right. That's right.
The ocean temperature will change, and studies suggest it's closely connected to human carbon emissions. Around 60 degrees Fahrenheit is the best temperature for baby lobsters, but around 8 degrees above or below that point can be stressful. For Maine lobsters, and Maine voters alike.
For people who don't acknowledge that there is climate change, they would be the last people I would vote for.
Some people vote with their wallet. If the economy's good, let's not change a thing. If the economy's bad, we need someone else. I don't know what percentage is going to vote based on climate. I really don't.
Now, obviously, things have changed since we were in Maine. The Chinese market, something this state heavily depended on, was one of the first things to disappear around Lunar New Year. What they've been left with is more of a locals selling to locals thing at a social distance from dock to trunk. What cash the fishermen do see comes in digitally now. But there is still an election in November, and this half-blue, half-red lobster state will play a big role in deciding our nation's heading going forward.
We can't push the extremes from each party into office so they keep fighting with each other. We need to find centrists that can sit down at the table and solve the problem.
You know, the one thing that just drives me crazy, how we ever politicized the climate change is beyond me.
Because there are folks that deny it altogether, and then there are folks that disagree on how we solve the problem.
And that's just part of our discussion with farmers of all political leanings in swing state Ohio.
I voted for the president in 2016.
Here in the heart of Ohio, the men and women who work these fields may very well cast the deciding vote in the 2020 presidential election. And the candidates know that well.
As president, I will lead America and the world.
In the great state of Ohio.
When a candidate wins in Ohio, they usually win the White House. That has been the case in every presidential election since 1948, with the exception of 1960 when Ohio chose Nixon over John F. Kennedy.
The Democrats have to improve their performance in small-town America in order to improve their position in Ohio, I think.
So it could be the Ohio farmer that decides this election.
The Ohio farmer and rural communities.
In the last few months, we've been remotely visiting those communities in central Ohio. Christopher Gibbs has been driving a tractor here since 1979, working in all kinds of weather as the caretaker on these 579 acres.
So I think we're ready to plant. We are planting.
It was early May before this Ohio family farm got most of their seed in the ground, and that is a late start. When the earth warms, the atmosphere holds more water. That means more rain.
Let's go plant.
And it's the rain that's pushed back these planting days.
Things have really changed in the last 10 years. Climate change is real.
And let's be clear, you're a lifelong Republican until just recently.
I am. I grew up in the Republican Party, I should say, within my family.
Mr. Trump won Ohio by less than 500,000 votes, but that was 4 years ago. Today, it's not just one Republican farmer concerned with the changing climate in Ohio.
My name is Fred Yoder. I've been a farmer here in Plain City, Ohio. Been farming about 45 years.
It's a growing chorus of Ohio farmers. But the farmers you talk to, they won't use the word climate change. Instead, they use a different term.
Yeah, they use things like soil health and soil resilience and weather pattern changes.
Whatever you call it, this state is getting soggier.
There's the rain coming.
Just about half of Ohio's entire landmass is farmland. Fields that used to roar in the springtime with sounds of tractors planting that year's crop in healthy, dry soil.
But now when rains come, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches at a time.
And of course, if you have that kind of deluge, you do a lot of damage in your fields as well.
Here's northern Ohio, central Ohio, southern Ohio. The average days with heavy rainfall are trending upwards, making it harder for farmers to plant their seeds.
The window of time that we have to work has been compressed into just literally 3 and 4 day increments.
You used to be able to plant for maybe 2 months at a time, but now that's whittled down to, it seems, days.
Last year, 50% of the corn and soybeans did not get planted in Ohio because we just didn't have the opportunity to plant. That window of opportunity is going to get shorter and shorter. We just really have to pay attention to what the weather's telling us and adapt to it.
So I have a lot of friends that they planted their whole 2019 crop in like 3 days.
Brian Brown, a millennial farmer with 70,000 YouTube subscribers, is part of that technological adaptation.
Morning.
Walking through our wettest field.
How has farming changed in your generation versus your father's and grandfather's generation?
There's a lot more tech involved. I'm coming to you from the cab of a Challenger 1038 tractor.
Today's tractors can plant day or night, guided by satellites laying down more seed in less time. But they are expensive. This model costs more than a 3 or 4 bedroom house here in Chillicothe, Ohio.
Science is going to be the best friend we have to figure this out.
The Ohio farmers we talk to are closely watching the environmental changes and this presidential election.
I did. I voted for the president in 2016.
Our farmers will be taken in. I keep saying go buy larger tractors.
Now we can see President Trump feels connected to Ohio farmers, and Ohio farmers feel connected to this changing climate in their fields. But does this climate issue actually affect votes in Ohio?
I don't see that here. I don't see that climate change is a deal breaker one way or the other.
Especially now after coronavirus.
One of the top issues that people care about in Ohio is health care. That's gone from almost a number one issue to the issue.
What is your bet about Ohio at this point?
I mean, I think at this point you'd expect Ohio to vote for Trump.
These Farm Belt states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, they were all crucial wins for Donald Trump last time. But this is a different election.
Every one of those farmers understand that there's something going on with the climate.
And for some farmers, there is scorched earth here.
What made you change your mind when it comes to supporting the president?
I think the tipping point for me was trade.
For decades, Farmer Gibbs shipped nearly 1/3 of his crop over to China. But in 2018, when the trade war with China began, that business disappeared.
We created these markets. They weren't created by the United States government. They were created by farmers.
The trade war, coronavirus, and these weather changes are all happening at once, and stuck in the middle is the Ohio family farmer, waiting longer and longer to get their seed in the ground.
You lose a bushel of production on corn every single day after the 10th of May. So the weather patterns have definitely changed because we just don't have the window of opportunity like we used to.
Climate change is real. It's absolutely real.
And based on all of this, you've decided to run for the House yourself against Jim Jordan in Ohio's 4th District.
I have.
Jim Jordan is a Republican Trump ally who has repeatedly voted against carbon legislation. So what's going on here? Is Ohio in for a big internal change? When we return, how pollsters are now saying Joe Biden could actually beat Donald Trump with or without this swing state.
You think that's possible?
Yeah, I do think that's possible, yeah.
We have traveled the USA from Texas to Maine, western deserts to Midwest cornfields, trying to answer one question. Do you think people vote on these types of environmental issues at all when it comes to big elections like this?
Some do. I don't think everyone does.
It does often register as an important issue, and more so for Democrats than Republicans.
As the climate changes, we have to adapt. And so whatever it is, we got to figure this thing out.
Why is this only an issue for progressive voters?
Maybe that's the question I should have been asking from the beginning.
Oh, did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard it. I'm not.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm trying to. You know, there are things that I just can't explain.
It is complicated. Each state has its own environmental issues, but this is a crazy time in history. The White House, the protests, the deaths, the unemployment, the worldwide pandemic. And in the middle of this, we're supposed to pick a president. In an alternate universe, the climate crisis would be a big deal. But this year,
There are so many issues right now, it's tough.
we've seen a lot. Melted icebergs in the Arctic making flooding worse for people in Florida, but we've also heard Republican Texas mayors say,
don't we have a moral and ethical obligation to leave the planet in a better condition than we found it?
So again, climate change is real.
And climate change has no political party. And as of now, neither does Ohio farmer Christopher Gibbs.
When I became an independent here back in the fall of 2019, it was interesting that I had to really come up with absolute reasons of why I felt this way and that way on particular issues. When you're part of a party, you are assigned a batch of values that you're supposed to subscribe to.
Partially based on what he's seen with the climate in his fields, Farmer Gibbs attempted to run for Congress. Although he won't be on the November ballot, here is what he learned on the campaign trail.
I get asked in the North about climate change, but I never get asked in the South about climate change because it doesn't come across the folks in the South's radar.
Here's what we heard from voters in Texas.
Government, it moves slowly. Private industry can move very quickly if it wants to.
In Texas oil country, wind power is booming. Solar fields are popping up all over Arizona. In Maine, where warmer water is driving lobster fisheries into Canada.
We throw so many more lobsters back over than we keep. So as people want sustainable seafood, it doesn't get any better than lobsters.
We're going to see more corn and soybeans being grown in Canada.
Your crop is moving to Canada?
There's a lot of corn and soybeans being grown in Canada now that was never grown 20 years ago.
Farmers are a part of this solution. They're a big part of this solution.
Look, I think the 2020 election is still basically 50-50 based on what we know about what Ohio tells us about other states. If Ohio is very close, the Democrats probably are looking pretty good in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So if Ohio is like 50-50, it probably means those other states are going to vote for Joe Biden, which means that Trump's probably going to lose even if he carries Ohio.
Truth is, it's unpredictable. It seems like a lifetime ago when we started this road trip. The world is so different now. Nevertheless, the climate is changing. The national election is on. Maybe this shouldn't have been a political issue to start with.
It should never have been political. How we ever politicized the climate change is beyond me,
because there are folks that deny it altogether, and then there are folks that disagree on how we solve the problem.
There's no such thing as a silver bullet to change and adapt to climate change, but there's a lot of silver buckshot.
Unlike bullets, a shotgun loaded with buckshot or birdshot takes out a target using a shell full of these little tiny pellets. Individually, they're not going to do much damage, but together, boom. No president, no law, no one person doing any one thing can stop the climate from changing, but if we all make these silver pellet changes, boom. You see, it's never been about only saving the planet. It's also about saving us, making this world more habitable for the future.